is E&P Reports, a vodcast from editor and publisher. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And this episode sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide understand the need to accelerate its growth now. Plus, traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way. IQ Audience Plus is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers media companies to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income now with IQ Audience Plus. Visit townnews.com EP today to learn more. And hi, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. If you're enjoying E&P Reports, our weekly vodcast series, by all means, if you're on your favorite podcast platform, please follow us right now. If you're watching the video version, go to the bottom of the screen, click the subscribe button, smash the bell to the right. We'll make sure you get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Look up the word raw story. On the internet, you're going to see it's listed as an American progressive news website, an online tabloid founded in 2004 by John K. Byrne. But we wanted to dive deeper into what Raw Story is, what's their mission, and what are they doing when it comes to showing both sides of a political argument. So let's explore Raw Story right now with Roxanne Cooper, their editor-in-chief, one of their top contributors, Jordan Green, and a Pulitzer Prize-winning contributor as well, David Cay Johnston. So let's talk Raw Story on this episode of E&P Reports. I've got a great group here today, unbelievable group from an organization that gets a lot of play. We're talking about a group called Raw Story. Let me go around the table here now and first say hello, of course, to my old friend, Roxanne Cooper. Roxanne, you are the editor-in-chief of Raw Story, correct?
I am.
You and I go way back, though, because you used to run the AAM, the Association of Alternative of News Weeklies, and boy, you are now running the show there. Also with us today, if I may be so bold, as we go down to the bottom left of your screen, we've got Jordan Green, a staff reporter at Raw Story. And if the face right below me looks familiar to you, well, it should. That's David Cay Johnston. Mr. Johnston, you are not the first Pulitzer Prize winner on this platform, but man, you are well known, and we're honored you carved out time for us today.
Well, thank you. And just David is fine. Okay,
David, it is. Let's first start off with Roxanne. Roxanne, for those that do not know what Raw Story is, give me the elevator pitch. What do you guys do? What do you focus on? And what is Raw Story?
Well, you've heard that story about the kid that started a blog in his dad's basement and it turned into a big website.
Yes.
Well, the owner of Raw Story, John Byrne, is actually that guy. He literally started Raw Story in the basement of his dad was a country doctor outside of Boston, and started Raw Story in the basement of his office. And then Raw Story had some early success in the investigative reporting world. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Raw Story was the first website to report that are Black sites in Europe during the War on Terror were in Poland. And Raw Story also became very famous for outing several DC politicians. So that is how people might remember the Raw Story from 17, 18 years ago.
Yeah, there's no question that if you investigate Raw Story and Google it, you lean to the left, but with a mission to do real news. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but well-sourced journalism, right, to counter what you might call fake news. Can I put it that way?
Sure. I mean, we're progressive, but we're not partisan. And very frequently you will find stories on our website about hypocritical Democrats, for example.
God forbid, there is one out there.
There's a couple of them. So the thing for us is we have to follow the truth, and while we are progressive and we do have progressive values, we're gonna call out hypocrisy wherever we see it. So,
well, now Jordan here, Jordan, I Googled you, and you have broken a lot of stories recently. You were really on top. I don't even know if anyone had heard the term Proud Boys until Jordan really, I mean, you became a real student of that organization, did you not, sir?
Well, I became a student of the far right and its many varied permutations, going back to Donald Trump's election and the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. So the Proud Boys is definitely part of that stream. But I would say no, many other reporters have done stellar reporting about the Proud Boys. I'm definitely not the first, so I can't take too much credit for that.
Yeah, but your investigation into these white supremacist groups have been picked up and retweeted, if I may use that term, and viral across the universe. David, I have to ask you a question. You aren't exactly hurting for work, sir. I mean, you're pretty busy, I understand. You're traveling, you're speaking, you're writing. You've written for the Times. Your background is well known. As a matter of fact, I'd like you to pick stocks for me, because correct me if I'm wrong, you were one of the first to predict that Donald Trump actually had a chance to become president. Am I right, sir?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I dropped everything I was doing on June 16th, 2015, because I was certain that the politics reporters would completely screw up the coverage of Donald Trump, and they did.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't get anybody to listen to me, including my former editors at the New York Times, one of whom I told about Donald's long, deep involvement with a major international drug trafficker, which only makes sense if Donald was involved with him in drug trafficking. And the editor said to me, well, when was this? And I said, basically throughout the 80s. And he goes, that's so long ago, no one cares. The following Sunday, the featured front page story in the New York Times was, what was Hillary Clinton doing in the 1970s?
I remember watching Morning Joe back then, and Mike Barnacle betting that this man would never be, he wouldn't even get the Republican nomination, or I'll buy you a truck, Mika. I mean, you must have been screaming at the TV, you're not getting it. This may work.
Well, and the reason we started a DC Report, we have a relationship with Raw Story. They publish a day ahead of us, which provides us with revenue to do the work we do. Mm-hmm. David Crook, my co-founder, was an editor at the LA Times, Three Little Thompson newspapers, where he grew their circulation by a third when nobody was growing them, and then created the Wall Street Journal Sunday, which had a circulation of 11 or 12 million, and entirely his idea. And as soon as Donald won the Electoral College, David and I both agreed that the White House press corps would do a good job of covering the palace intrigues, but they were going to do a lousy job of what he was going to do to our government.
There you go.
And so we started DC Report for that. And there are many, many stories we've broken since we've put up our first piece right after, a few days after Trump took office, that the New York Times and the networks and others have picked up on, very often without crediting us. In fact, when I got Donald Trump's 2005 tax return, and the Times wrongly credited this to Rachel Maddow, and I complained, they said, well, nobody's heard of DC Report. And I said, that has nothing to do with the rules of the Times. You have to credit us. And they finally came around and did so. But we've, for a long time, tried to get people to understand that who Donald Trump is and why he's incredibly awful for the country. But we've also, as Roxanne mentioned, we write a lot about things Democrats do that don't make sense. I just had a piece about how the Biden administration couldn't sell ice cream to children in July. You look at the human infrastructure bill, and what do you hear on TV and in the newspapers? $3.5 trillion. I mean, what a huge number. Well, it's over 10 years, and per American, it's $2.88 per American. And for 80% of Americans, you get a tax cut. And if you're in the rich group that's going to pay for this, guess what? You're going to sell more goods and services and get even richer if it becomes law. But nobody reports it that way. Nobody does the basic math and the basic explanation of policy. We do that at DC
But you,
Report.
again,
Story.
Even though you may have an opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, Roxanne, you are the editor-in-chief of this. You do get content then here from David, but it's all sourced, right? That's not opinion. You are doing factual, sourced news, correct?
Right. And even if David was doing just opinion, I mean, everybody knows the best editorial pieces are reported. You know, there's reporting in them. They don't give Pulitzer Prizes to columnists who don't do reporting. So even when David is doing an opinion piece for us, it does include reporting in it.
But here's my conundrum. David, you are doing a sourced article, and you are correct. Okay, let's put it all on the table. It seems like the far right is manipulating the media perfectly. They throw these shiny toys that the reporters jump on, correct? Go nuts with, and then while the other hand's doing something else, right? I mean, this.
So Mike, the first thing is at DC Report, we never use unnamed sources. We never go to press conferences. We never work off press releases. And we use links to verifiable information so people can cross-check everything we have. We have run 2 corrections in almost 5 years.
Wow.
Both very minor details. We referred to Almaty as the capital of Kazakhstan instead of the former capital.
There you go.
And the other error was on that, that level. The news media's fundamental problem here is that most journalists, even the very well-paid, big-time journalists you see on television who work for the networks, simply quote what their sources tell them. They don't ever go to things like IRS data tables, Social Security Administration reports, Inspector General reports, the Federal Register, the Congressional Record. And so they're captive to what their sources are telling them. And I read stories every day in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, where I go, gee, this is a very readable story, and that reporter doesn't know what they're writing about. They've put together a sensible narrative, but clearly they only know what their sources told them, and they don't have a deeper understanding of what they're doing.
Yeah, but I remember way back in my youth when I took over my first radio station, which actually had a news department. Back, in the 80s, we actually did news in AM radio. We used to remember morning shows had 5 records. We had news, sports, traffic, all that kind of stuff. And I went to an NAB, and Fred Friendly was on the stage, and he was doing an amazing thing about giving people the news they want or the news they need. Now, who's right here when the anchor on the echo chamber cable channels builds these millions and millions of audience with opinion? Is there room for us? I'm talking, when I say us, I mean that's E&P's mission, news publishing, sourced, credible news. Is there room for that in our society, sir?
Well, there is, but you've hit upon a fundamental problem that people like Ben Bagdikian were warning us about 30, 40, 50 years ago. Lots of people want to only be reconfirmed in what they believe. And now that we have 500 channels, we literally have 500 channels, people can get into a silo, left, right, only business, only sports, whatever it is, and never get pushed beyond that. When Fred Friendly was running CBS News, there were 3 television networks.
Right.
And surprisingly to a lot of people, when I tell them this, there were studies done that showed they didn't do the exact same news every night. They tended to pick the same big story every night, but not always. But you got people who felt a great responsibility to be thorough, well vetted, and I would argue overly cautious in what they defined as news. Today, there's clearly a lucrative market in just telling people what they want to hear, including lying to them constantly. The problem with that model is it's fragile, it's vulnerable. And in the case of the biggest successes at that over at Fox, their audience is aging. It's more people my age. then young people and advertisers are not interested in you and me, Mike, as you well know.
No way.
They probably think Jordan is a little long in the tooth for advertising.
No, they want the 18 to 34-year-old. No ifs,
Right.
ands, or buts. There's no question.
And one of the things that sustained this is the cable TV model, where, of course, if nobody bought an ad on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, they would still collect millions of dollars a year from cable TV revenues. That whole cable economic model is slowly dying.
Right, through streaming. So, Jordan, I know you're hanging there, and I want to just ask you a question. You now are generating tons of content for Roxanne. You are out there generating story after story. We all know that we have a free press. That doesn't mean a free hand press. You're sourcing your news, but you are not an algorithm, sir. You have a socioeconomic image in your brain from all of the stimuli you've had over your years. How do you stay unbiased when you're writing? I mean, this is what I want to know, Jordan.
Is that a goal?
Is that a goal? Okay, sorry. Is that not a goal, Roxanne?
Sorry to cut in on you.
Please do.
You saved him. Go ahead.
I think the journalism model that came after the advent of television, where people were objective. I'm from the alt weekly world, so I have a different perspective on this than a lot of people in our business. But I mean, I don't think humans are objective, and I think it's silly to pretend like they're objective. And so there's a difference between being critical and having your own worldview and acknowledging it. You don't tell people you're fair and balanced when clearly you're not fair and balanced. But if, we tell our readers, this is who we are, we're putting this out there, and we're going to strive to tell you the truth anyway. But this is our worldview. I think that's a more honest way to interact with your audience than pretending like you're totally objective, which I don't believe is possible.
But all journalism is biased. There's no question. And you can go back. Go ahead. You're about to jump in.
I would argue that it's not bias. There's one area of authority that reporters and editors have, and I'm talking about the news side, not the editorial.
Okay, go ahead.
And that is, this is what we think it's important for you to know.
Right.
And so we have a two-part mission to pay a zealous attention to detail, spelling people's oddly spelled names and getting budget numbers right and exact actions the police took in a case, and putting things on the other end in their proper place in the universe. So we don't turn gnats into elephants and elephants into gnats. And having a perspective is, of course, there. What is seen as news in New York by the New York Times or the New York Daily News or Spectrum One is not what the perspective would be of someone who lives in Bruges or Shanghai or Singapore because of the different societies that you're in. But that's not bias. That's your professional perspective. And you draw an audience or lose one based on your ability to, if it's news, reliably report it, or as we've seen with this conflation where a lot of people think the nightly cable TV shows, where I'm very often appear, used to be on all three, but Fox doesn't put me on anymore. Those aren't news shows. Those are opinion and discussion shows.
But the average person, I hate to say it, sees that logo, says this must be news.
Yes, no, I think
Tucker Carlson's giving me news.
Right. We have done a terrible job going back decades in educating people and making them literate about the news. Interestingly, Finland, other European countries, Singapore, and all teach young people, here's how to understand news. I have students, I'm not a lawyer, but I've taught law at Syracuse University College of Law now for about 14 years. And I have students who think Wikipedia is a news source. They have not been given any training in, how to what's called media literacy.
Even though it's a necessary function in a true pluralistic democratic society.
Well, when
having pre-information.
When you went to school, Mike, wherever it was, I'll bet you in junior high school you diagrammed sentences.
Of course.
And I'll bet in college, or I'm sorry, I bet in high school you were
I
required.
don't do that now.
Did you, Jordan?
No, I said I'm confirming they don't teach.
Okay, well, that's what I was going to get to next. And the three of older ones of us, we all had to read novels in high school. And if we were lucky, we got novels that were interesting and engaging. And if we were unlucky like me, we got Silas Marner, which is a horrible book.
Somerset Maugham of Human Bondage. I enjoyed it. Go ahead.
Today, many students go to high school and they're never assigned to read a novel.
No.
They may get one chapter. They will have discussions. There are teachers who show movies. And I was shocked when I first learned this. And then I found out in New York State, I live in Rochester, New York, that you can't fire a teacher for doing that, for not teaching the books, but showing a movie, which doesn't help you with the purpose of having students read novels, which is to understand the other and to create in their own mind narratives and characters and see them in their own way. So while the rest of the world has been upping its education and its standards and its demands, we've been saving football.
Yeah, but let's put all our cards on the table, assuming, and I know I'm going to get hate text for this and be thrown out there and destroyed, assuming that the far right does lie, okay, that they are giving mistruth. Oh, Roxanne, you're going, I mean, assuming that's the case, would that not fight that if we were to start forcing that into our education system? They would rather have an uninformed public.
In fact, they already do that. I mean, there's a very good book called Lies My Teacher Told Me about all the falsehoods we teach in American history. I, in lectures to students for years, will ask them what was the Civil War about, and students in America will say, well, the War of Northern Aggression.
Right.
And when you bring up slavery, many of them say, no, that wasn't really the issue. Read the secession declarations, Mississippi being the clearest. They all began in the very first sentence with, we are seceding from the Union to protect the most valuable of all assets, slaves. And that's exactly what it was about. But we don't teach those things honestly. We don't teach lots of things honestly in America. And that over time leads to the problems that news organizations that report facts have. And by the way, well, Fox in particular is well known for just making stuff up, and that's been well documented. There are places on the left that do the same thing. I get some left-wing blogs there or news, quote unquote, news sites that are deeply into conspiracy theories that propound various items of nonsense where they appear perhaps to link to some fact, but they go off in space. And there are plenty of right-wing groups that do that. I subscribe to a huge array of things, so I get to see this. But making a living by lying about stuff is working quite well, and that speaks very badly about the critical thinking skills of large numbers of Americans. I
am a huge believer that we all need doses daily of Aaron Sorkin. You might think I'm totally... I think he has an amazing way of showing both sides of an argument in an entertaining yet educational way. There was a show he came out with that I loved that no one watched. It never found an audience, called Studio 60. I don't know if you ever heard of it. But there was you had this left-wing left-wing producer, and then you had this right-wing religious comedian, and she said to him these words. And then I'm going to bounce this off Roxanne first, Dave. I know you're going to jump in, Dave. I don't understand the culture words. And he said, your side resents my side because you think my side thinks you're stupid. And we resent your side because we think you're stupid. Okay, there it is. There it is in a nutshell. The condescend. See, I wrote this editorial about we got to stop foxitis as well as condescenditis. If we keep putting down and acting like media elite, and that's a flyover state. I hope their cousins are all getting married down there. I'm just going to the other coast. How can we become a pluralistic society? Roxanne, do you consider the other side stupid?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by the other side.
There you go.
Because you mentioned flyover states, and not to interject yet another news organization into this conversation, but something everybody should check out is this network of sites called States Newsrooms. And
Say
they're
that again.
all
Safe newsrooms.
states newsrooms. They're all
STA.
over red states and flyover states.
States newsroom. Okay, go ahead.
States newsroom. And they're doing great work on a state-by-state basis. And it's just a really good network of sites. Anyway, I didn't want to get too far in the weeds on that, but I think there are smart people in Kansas, obviously. You know, our reporter Jordan Green here is from North Carolina. He lives in North Carolina. Much of his perspective is informed by growing up in North Carolina. And in fact, I should say this about Raw Story. Most of our writers are not living in the Beltway or in California. We're all over the place. We're a completely virtual company. And one of the reasons we've always seen that as a benefit is that, you know, what's important in the Beltway is not important to the guy I have in Montana.
Right.
And the guy I have in Montana is bringing this perspective to our organization and to the news that's lacking everywhere.
All right.
I always laugh because I'm from California. New York had an earthquake, and I was like, it's a 3.2 earthquake. I stir my coffee with 3.2 earthquake.
Well,
but for days, it was, there's an earthquake.
All right. Well, let David, hold on for a second, because Jordan, you're going to have to shut up. You're taking over too much of this conversation right now. But I need you to tell me. She just painted you with a brush. She said, okay, he's from the Carolinas, but he's got an open mind. You're from the Triad, right? You're from, you know, there are more PhDs per square inch there than any other place in the world, correct? I mean,
Greensboro, North Carolina. No, I concur with what Roxanne said completely. She didn't ask me to move to Washington, D.C. when she hired me in March, and I'm glad for that fact. I'd like to bring a perspective from outside of the Beltway and outside of the major media centers. And I think you asked about bias, and I think I agree with Roxanne that we should own up to our perspectives. I think it's like a tricky mission to always try to discern the truth and to not get kind of captured by the different interests. It's like I don't like reporters becoming the reporter for the industry of government, which I think is a hazard. Like when I was younger, I worked in construction and retail deliberately because I wanted to know what life was like for a lot of other people who are outside of the intelligentsia. So I'm sorry, I think I got off of.
No, you're doing great. All right, David, bring this home. You got the magic wand right now. Stop the pluralism. How are we going to do it? Is media the culprit? Is media simply playing along, or is media have no impact? I mean, what's going on?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a divide, not unlike we've seen with race and income in America.
Okay.
There is a segment of the population, 20% perhaps, who are very well informed. They understand how to separate wheat from chaff. They have a wide range of political views, but they're serious people in the sense that they want to understand how the world works. There's a equal or probably somewhat larger group, more like a third rather than a fifth of the population, who Chris Christie just went after in a speech he gave at the Reagan Library, who don't care about facts, only want to be told what they want to hear, and openly buy into lies. And down that road, he argued, is the death of the Republican Party. And he traced it back to McCarthyism and the few people who stood up to McCarthy. And in between is this majority of the country that sort of pays attention to the news, often gets it from radio, not knowing that radio news often comes from the morning newspaper.
Of course.
And is not particularly sophisticated about this. So having the cable news channels that are not subject to the fairness doctrine, getting rid of the fairness doctrine, having people who are not proficient at reading, only 48% of American adults are proficient readers, less than half. That should scream at us something about our society. All you have to do is go onto a site like Nextdoor or the comment section at Raw Story sometimes, which is very lively, and you'll see people who don't know how to spell words, and they don't seem to be troubled by it either, or how to construct a sentence. By the way, one of the things Raw Story does that I think is very impressive, if you want to keep track of outrages, Roxanne curates that absolutely fabulously. Here's the pastor who told his flock, the COVID vaccine is the devil's work. Stay away from it. And then he dies and leaves, a spouse and 3 kids. And here's the politician who, just made this stuff up and got called out on it. And they actually do a very good job of finding that stuff and telling people about it. But fundamentally, I think our democracy is in very deep trouble. I've thought that for a long time. And I think a lot of the resentment and distrust of news grows out of 50 years of Washington not paying attention to the vast majority of Americans. And here's a little fact I keep citing at Raw Story often. In 2018, 90% of Americans made less money than in 1973.
Wow.
People in 1973.
It's the divide. We are not one society anymore. We're a divided society.
And the reasons for that, Mike, are very clear in the public record. I mean, I've been writing about this. When I first started writing about the New York Times, we got all these "you're crazy" content. But we got rid of unions, starting with Reagan. Well, you can trace decline for the bottom 90% and decline in the density of unions, and they track perfectly. We changed other rules so that lots of people today don't have pensions. We are continuing to live under a set of government rules basically adopted between 1890 and 1940.
That's true.
And we're not moving beyond them and saying we need to do new things in better ways. And we've sold the public, the Milton Friedman and his crowd sold the public in this idea that there is something called deregulation. There is no such thing. There's only new regulation. Everything is regulated. Baseball regulates how many stitches are on the ball. Right. Universities regulate dating. When I bring that up with my students, they look around quizzically like, what? And eventually they come around and say, oh, sexual harassment. I said, yeah, dating. Bad dating leads to sexual. It is regulated by the university.
And there's my pull quote. But there is still going to be a faction that listen to what you just said, sir, and say, you are an elitist. I have my right to be uneducated. Moreover, I want to blame it on that person because it's my reason for not being where I want to be. And then here's the challenge. Then our leaders will fan those flames, right? I mean, okay, be angry. And it's their fault. It's their fault. Meanwhile, your income doesn't come up. Meanwhile, you lose your job and no one's helping you along.
Let's focus on solving problems. I was on a right-wing radio show 15 years ago, and this guy comes on and he says, you're one of those elites. And I said, thank you. And he went, what? And I said, that's a tremendous thank you. I mean, for a kid who had to go to work at 10 and had to work full time at 13 and help support my parents since I was 13 and had a family got married at 17. I mean, for you to say I'm an elite, I mean, thank you. That's just terrific. And I said, you don't have any idea what that word means, do you, sir? And unfortunately, we have made being dumb an okay thing. And others have written about how you trace this to Sarah Palin, the selection of Sarah Palin by the McCain campaign, which was a huge mistake they now realize in retrospect. But it's not okay to be dumb. It's not okay to be uneducated. And in a modern world where the world is getting more and more complicated, where there's more and more change coming as we master both the physical universe and the constructed universe, it is crucial that we develop a society more like South Korea, Singapore, Japan, Finland, Germany, Norway, where you are well educated, you have critical thinking skills. That's how we build a wealthy future that's broad-based.
Wow. I have a friend, I do want to interject this. I have a friend who has a saying that Democrats all think that Republicans are all stupid and Republicans think that all Democrats are evil. So I think that divide does exist. I often think that we kind of ridicule dumb things that conservatives and Republicans do at our own peril, because it's a way of dismissing, it's a dismissiveness and underestimation that can come back to bite us. But then there is, really the difficult, vexing thing to grapple with, a whole population that thinks that liberals and Democrats are evil. And that's hard to overcome.
Well, to go back to an Aaron Sorkin quote from American President, this is an advanced society, and it's going to push back. You're supposed to be able to listen to someone scream at the top of their lungs something that you abhor and at least allow them to say it. And that is democracy.
And by the way, every journalist I have urged repeatedly to watch the newsroom. I think it is a searing indictment of our business.
It's an amazing, and he does such a nice job always showing both sides of the argument. He gives credence to both sides so well. That's why I think we all need a dose of that, because there is two sides to an argument. That's democracy.
Or 3 or 4 or 5.
Or 3, 4, or 5. That is democracy. We just have to allow it to happen and cook. It's a half a loaf society, and that's tough. Well, anyway, I want to thank you all for your valuable time. Roxanne, more information on Raw Story, they go to rawstory.com. Is that correct, ma'am?
Yes.
There you go, rawstory.com, and Roxanne's contact information is there. Mr. David Surd, if they want to learn more about your initiative in DC, it's called what again?
Well, everything we publish is at Raw Story first.
Okay.
But dcreportsingular.org is our own website, and we're nonprofit, no ads. After we and Raw Story have published, we let other people republish us. And our About page will tell you about our philosophy of fact-based journalism, but not namby-pamby. Well, they said this and we said that. We believe in snark and point of view, but you got to factually make your case and be fair and rounded. And Jordan, anyone wants to start Googling your name, you've got a lot of stuff that you're churning out that's excellent. We really appreciate the great reporting you're doing. Guys, thank you. Stay healthy, stay well, and keep working hard, okay? We really appreciate you. Take care.
Okay, thank you.